Welcome everyone to another live stream here on Nerd of the Rings. It's been a while since we've done one of these. Today we thought we'd have some open Q&A and just chat a while. And with me is one of my good friends from the Tolkien YouTuber community, Robert from In Deep Geek. Robert, how's it going?
Hey Matt, thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing well, but thank you so much for having me on. We've been talking about doing some sort of collaboration for so long. I don't think I've been on your channel before, so it's been a while, but it's great to be here. And can I just start by saying congratulations on
thank you.
Okay, it's well deserved. You're the best of the best, and a fine and wonderful human being at that. So yeah, it's great, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, shoot, ditto to you, my friend, because you are also one of my absolute favorite YouTubers, and it's a pleasure to have you on. And yeah, we've been chatting with it for a while. I have this bad tendency when I do like we've done Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers for the 20th anniversaries, but I end up doing them later at night when it's like 2 o'clock in the morning for you. So I think I've timed you out of those. Not realizing what I was doing at the time, but yeah, I'm glad to do this a little bit earlier, so you could join us today.
It's lovely to be able to start this at 10 p.m. So let's just see how how late we can go.
That's right. All right, folks. Well, we're gonna have some open Q&A. Basically, we're gonna let you guys determine the trajectory of our conversations. I figured there'd probably be maybe some follow-up conversation after I did my review for Rings of Power. War of the Rohirrim comes out in a little over a year, so we could talk about that. The Gollum game, so that just randomly popped into my head. I hadn't planned on talking about that, but it just popped into my head as I was thinking of things. And it got delayed. It was supposed to come out last year, but it got delayed to this year, and we still don't know. The last I heard, they said sometime between, I believe it was April and September of this year, which seems like a big range as we're getting close to release time. It's not often that you say it might come out in 3 months or maybe 6. We'll see. Play it by ear.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one because they when they sort of announce or semi-announce a release date, it normally means that we know we're quite close. But then they kind of push it back and then say, well, maybe, in this kind of 6-month period, in about a year. It's like it does send a few little alarm bells going. But I mean, I've not heard anything bad, to be honest. That's not me. But it's just, what I'm hoping is this is just a sign that they are trying to make it excellent. And that's I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt until we hear otherwise, is that it's the bar on kind of fantasy games is so high these days. Elden Ring came out, God of War, Ragnarok, that kind of thing. They're so good that I think maybe they just thought, you know what, we just need to up it a little bit.
Well, yeah, put a little extra time. And it's ironic because just maybe a couple hours ago they announced that the big new Star Wars game, Jedi Survivor, got delayed till April, so it's like a month and a half or something. So it wasn't huge, but these things happen in gaming, so I'm not necessarily throwing up alarm bells. We've got a super chat. Washington Weather Chasers. Oh, that's kind of fun, chasing weather. I never wanted to do it myself, but it's admirable that there are folks who do want to do it. Congrats on 900k subs. My wife and I have enjoyed your content. Do you think Anatar will come onto the scene in season 2 of Rings of Power? I wish the season ended with revealing him as a new character. Yeah, I was hoping for the same. I like going into the finale, I was like the writing was on the wall that Halbrand could be Sauron, but I was denying it until the uttermost end of hope and hoping that we would get Anatar. I look at the way season 1 ended, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Robert, because I look at it and say, I don't know how you can not do the Anatar story now, because on one hand, they already kind of sort of told a little bit of the creation of the rings, but they left out the 9, the 7, and the lesser rings and pretty much the entire process of making the rings. And so I'm kind of expecting there to be the Anatar story in the creation of the 9 and the 7, perhaps. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. My gut feeling is the minor rings they're just going to ignore, which I think is a
probably.
shame. But I think they're
Yeah.
just going to say, let's forget all of that. We don't have the
Yeah.
build up.
And it
Just
might
in
cause
terms,
more confusion too. Like
it could
the lesser, like
do.
Peter Jackson didn't really mess with them, so I kind of get that.
No, I mean, in terms of the wider lore, then I think the biggest miss there is the fact that this is basically what Gandalf initially thought the
Yes.
One Ring was.
Right.
When Bilbo got it, he thought it was probably one of those minor rings. But I'm not going to get too upset if we don't have the minor rings.
Yeah.
In terms of plot, though, the way I see it is there's 3 things I think that has to happen with Sauron in this next season. So I think that they're going to have to rattle through this quite quickly. He's got to claim Mordor in some way, and he's got to make Mount Doom ready to be forging the One Ring. It may well be we end up with him forging the One Ring at the end of season 2. That'll be quite a good finale. He's got to, in some way, be involved with the forging of the 9 and the 7. And then, from what we've heard, there will be a massive battle, which I can only assume is the war of the elves and Sauron. So that's him going to try and claim them. That's a lot of story for them to get through in 8 episodes. So I think, yes, I think they probably will create this other character who comes into Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor's all excited. I now know how to make rings, and this other guy comes in and says, "Oh, I can help you out here." I can see how that could work. So maybe it's all a bit the wrong way round, and it doesn't quite flow with the way that Tolkien would want it and wrote it. But I think that the impression I've always got from these showrunners is they're trying to kind of tick the boxes of that was in the story, we'll make that happen, and it doesn't matter. So the logic of the order and things like that matters less to them than getting things in there. So I think yes, probably Anatar, probably episodes like 3 and 4 or something like that.
Yeah. I'm hoping, because that's that's a moment that I dreamed of seeing in adaptations, and I kind of made this point in my review. Like, fans of these series and fans of these books, they dream of like seeing this stuff come to life, and nothing's ever going to take away like how it plays out in our heads as we're reading, of course, but you want to see a faithful adaptation that nails what Tolkien laid out. And so that was one of my biggest things after the finale, was that the creation of the rings had very, very little resemblance to anything that I would have picked up from the text. But so I'm hoping that come season 2 we'll get Anatar, and I think now that the 3 that they've kind of gotten that plot point, I have other thoughts on the whole elves dying thing, but they've gotten that plot point out of the way with the 3 rings. So I'm hoping that this, with the 7 and the 9, they can capture that elven hubris that is at the core of the Rings of Power, because it's not like it's very sympathetic as it plays out in the show, where we're all gonna die if we don't make these rings. Like, okay, I can understand why you would want to do that. Whereas in the books, it's like they do it because they want to forestall the decays of time, and it's a very much out of pride, and it's not this altruistic reason. So I think them going further down the rings rabbit hole, so to speak, could actually drive that point home, that it's more out of greed than out of necessity.
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, I think they've the way I always saw this, and in fact, one of the things the showrunners initially talked about was like having these tent poles in the second age, is that, and I agreed with what they were saying, was that you have these crucial things. Tolkien didn't write huge amounts about the second age, but there are some key things that happen. There's the forging of the rings, there's the fall of Numenor, rise of Sauron, Last Alliance, things like that.
Yeah.
Between that, I kind of allow a little bit more leeway. Okay,
Yes.
you can come up with your own stories. Tolkien was certainly at one stage in his life, he was quite relaxed about that idea that people might come in and do that. But I wanted those tent poles, as they called them, to stay the same. So, the fact that they've shifted around with so much about the
tent pole,
exactly. A tent pole did kind of grate with me, and if they can sort of pull it back a little bit, great. I'd be very happy with that.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So I like that the tent pole is a good. I think I've been calling them, big canon moments is kind of what I've just. Big canon moments, they're kind of like mile markers, like, okay, we're gotten this far, in this story, you've been making up some stuff. Okay, but here's this foundational piece of the story. How are you gonna do this? And so when it got to the finale, that was the moment that I was waiting for the entire season. Like, okay, we're getting to creating rings. Like, this is where I'm gonna be watching closer to see what you're doing with it. And that's, like I said, that's where a lot of my frustrations lied with the season. But yeah, anyway, so we'll see. Hopefully Anatar shows up and we get that depicted. Cyber Hobbit, thanks for the super chat. Just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of your channel. Thanks so much. I love listening to your content when I'm driving / exercising. That's pretty impressive that you can drive and exercise at the same time. Sorry, such a dad joke. Your channel is part of the reason I started my own Lord of the Rings collectibles and really enjoy your unboxings too. Well, thank you so much, Cyber Hobbit. Speaking of unboxings, I got this really cool thing I wanted to show off. So, like, this is a Balrog as a duck. Have you seen these before? Where they have
I've got some other. I've got like a Legolas duck, and I've got a few other Gandalf duck, but I haven't seen the Balrog. That's quite impressive.
So Smeagol here is my favorite one to date, and then they sent me this giant Balrog one, and it's massive. Look at that thing; it's so huge. So that's my Bal duck right there. He's even got a whip. He does have wings,
and
so
if anybody's
gonna be triggered by the wings,
I am, but I'm letting him get away with it because it's a duck. Those are duck
right.
wings, not Balrog wings.
Yes, people know my stance on the wings. Like, they look cool, but they don't actually have them. They're metaphorical, but that's okay because it looks cool. All right. Amin says, hey, Matt, fairly new follower here. Congrats on 900K. Over the weekend, I went to the Fellowship of the Ring in concert, and it was amazing. Have you been? Man, that is awesome. That's so cool. That's one of those things that it's kind of like a bucket list thing for me. Like, I would love to go see Lord of the Rings in concert. Any of them, really. But no, I have not been. Yeah, they're having them in New York right now.
I think they're in London as well.
Are they?
Later in the year? Which I keep on meaning to book because I suspect they get booked up stupidly far in advance. So right. I do keep on meaning to.
Yeah, I think they, in New York at least, they added more dates after their initial, like, the week after they announced it. I think. It would be super cool, but I've not done it yet. Okay, I'm not gonna try to pronounce the name there, but first super chat, thanks so much. Great channel. Return to Moria hype. That's another upcoming game. That's pretty exciting. Have you heard about Return to Moria at all, Robert?
A little bit. So all I know is this is I think it's an app game as much as anything else, isn't it? But it's,
no, it's not. No,
is it not?
No.
Then tell me about it. I'm eager to learn.
So it's on PC. But I think they are planning to eventually have it on consoles, I think. But it'll initially be a PC game. When I first saw it, I thought it was like a mobile, like a an iPhone Android game, but no, it's a PC game, and it takes place in the Fourth Age, and you are a dwarf, and you guys go reclaim Moria. So under the rule of King Durin the Seventh, I believe.
Excellent. The
Yeah.
Endless.
Yeah.
Good.
Mark Adams, congrats. Thanks so much, Mark. Epic Kingdom asks, what made you start a Tolkien channel? So this would be a fun one for both of us to answer. So, I mean, yours obviously covers more than just Tolkien, but it'd be fun for both of us to answer this one. So I learned a lot about how YouTube works at my full-time job as a videographer, and growing the YouTube channel for the place I worked. It was a higher ed institution, and I had all this knowledge and was like, gosh, I feel like I could do this YouTube thing and do it kind of sort of okay. And at the time I was filming weddings on the side, because higher ed, it's not, the highest paying gig as a videographer or in higher ed, like both those combinations, it's kind of, it is what it is. So I was filming weddings on the side to make a little extra money, pay down student loans, stuff like that. And my pie in the sky dream at that time was, maybe I can grow this channel big enough that I don't have to shoot weddings anymore, because it's a long day, it's stressful. But yeah, so I just, Tolkien was the thing that I knew if I was going to talk about something, and if I was going to choose editing videos over sleep, then it was going to be, had to be something that I was super excited about. And that's always been Tolkien for me. And yeah, and now this is my full-time job. Now I don't shoot weddings or have the other full-time job. So, yeah. How about you, Robert?
Yeah, well, I have, unlike you, I started with zero knowledge about anything to do with video creation, YouTube. I mean, obviously, I went onto YouTube, but I had no idea about how any of this worked. And I was, I happened to be watching, this is a long time ago, I happened to be watching a Game of Thrones channel. I'm a big Game of Thrones fan as well. And this thought suddenly struck me, hey, maybe I could do that. And so I literally just Googled. Now, I mean this as encouragement to anyone who's out there thinking, I couldn't possibly do that. You have to know lots. I literally Googled, how do you make a YouTube video? And that's where I went from there. I bought myself a £10 microphone, $10-ish microphone, which was the worst. If you go back and listen to my first video, the sound quality is abysmal. It sounds like I'm in a bathroom. It's terrible. I have no video editing skills, and it looks terrible. But I just started from there, and I did the first. I remember exactly. I did my first video. I didn't tell anyone. I had a day to myself, and I made this video. It was like a 5-minute video. It was about Tyrion, a character from Game of Thrones. I told no one about it. I made it. I uploaded it, and I went to bed. And I woke up the next morning, and I thought, I wonder what's happened with that. And I had 3 views and 1 subscriber.
Nice.
And it just like, how did that happen? Nobody knew about this. It was, and something clicked in my brain, and I can't remember who that subscriber was, but thank you, whoever you were. But that just gave me that glimmer of hope that this does work. You create something, and people will watch it. And so it was then just sort of like building it up over time. And yeah, so unlike Matt, I've covered. At the moment, mostly do Lord of the Rings stuff and A Song of Ice and Fire, and also a bit of The Witcher. But I sort of dot around and do a few other things as well. So yeah, that's how I started. It just kind of like grew up from being just a random thing I did every now and then to a part-time thing. And now, thankfully, like Matt, I can do this. I wouldn't say I do it full time, but this is now my main source of income. So it's astonishing, and you can start with zero knowledge. So
for sure,
take that as encouragement, anyone who is thinking about doing this.
Yeah, and as further encouragement for folks, I remind folks that this is not having channels of our size is not an overnight thing by any means. Like I saw very, very little growth in my channel for 9 months before it really started to to kind of take off, and I almost stopped. Like I was a little over, like 7-8 months or something like that in, and I was, had just almost gotten to 5,000 subscribers, and I was just we had a new baby, and I was like, I don't know, like maybe I should stop this. And around that time, my wife was like, well, you should like give it another month or so. And probably 3 weeks later, I had my Gandalf video kind of took off, and around that same time, right before my Gandalf video, I got my first Patreon supporter, and it was like this nice little boost, like, okay, all right, there's somebody willing to give me $1 a month to do these videos, so I'm gonna bust out something big. And so I did the Gandalf video, and yeah, the rest, as they say, is history, I guess. Halfwit asks, hey nerd, I wish you didn't have the gloves on for your Rings of Power thoughts. You have so much Tolkien knowledge. ROP is trash, be honest. So this is I'm actually glad this came up. Robert and I were actually talking about this a little bit before we started recording. There's this weird thing that we are in. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it seems like everybody wants you to either be 100% for or 100% against things, which is very odd to me. That's just not how I operate. I in my review, for example, I said the things that, I pointed out the things that I thought did not work well, the things that I did not like, and the things that I thought did work well, and the things that I did like. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I'm not gonna just go around spouting hyperbole and saying that, because I don't like XYZ storylines, that the whole thing is trash. I mean, come on, guys. Come on. So I don't know. Feel free to disagree. I've always made it abundantly clear that my thoughts are my own, and they're no more or less valid than any other fan. Like, so feel free to disagree. I say, hey, I love the music. That was my first thing that first positive that I mentioned in my review. I love the music. Bear McCreary did a great job. If you didn't like the music, that's cool. You can say so. Whatever. But yeah, this whole thing about, we have to either say something's 100% trash or the greatest masterpiece of all time. It is neither of those things. And it would almost be easier for me. I mean, obviously, I would root for it being the greatest masterpiece of all time. But like it would almost be easier in some ways if it was just like complete garbage. But there's so much promise that I see in there that on one hand, it gives me hope for, the craftsmanship that goes into it. On the other hand, it also makes me frustrated at some things because I see all this great craftsmanship at play. And then there's these story elements that I don't think live up to the craftsmanship. So yeah, there's going to be nuance. I'm sorry if that's weird for some folks, but there's going to be nuance in my conversations around this show. And I will always say that with this show, for whatever reason, this show has been a lightning rod for people. But whether it's this show, whether it's War of the Rohirrim, whether it's the Gollum game, I hope there's not people out there being that worked up about the Gollum game, but it's a video game, guys. Whatever. So whatever the adaptation is, I'm gonna come at it with a nuanced approach and be honest with you guys about what I like and don't like. So there's my little spiel on that. Robert, do you have anything to add on that topic, or should we just move on?
Well, I agree with you absolutely, and as I say, that's exactly what we were saying beforehand. It's only the Sith deal in absolutes. So it's this is
That's a
I
good
don't want to add to it. I think you said it. It's preach, brother, and all the rest of it.
Only Sith deal in absolutes. I love it. That came to mind a lot over the past year, I gotta say. Lady of Endunier, thanks so much for the super chat. All right, let's see here. I want to try to catch up a little bit here. When are you getting into MESBG and First Army? So I have the paints. Again, I'm looking at them on my shelf right up here. I have the paints, but I have not opened them. I have not opened my first box yet. Man, I wish I could write scripts for my videos while also painting. That would be like, yeah. If I love listening to audiobooks and stuff, so I think that would be a great pairing. But I find myself needing to write scripts for videos a lot, and yeah, I think there's also the parental part of me that knows that I would have to start painting my models and then lock my room from my kids because my 2-year-old would get in here and just wreak havoc with paints out and stuff. And I'd get interrupted a lot. But I don't know. Hopefully soon. I need to find like a place that I might be able to be tutored a bit on how to actually play the game. Have you played any tabletop games like that, Robert?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've done quite a bit of things like Warhammer in my time. I did play the Games Workshop Middle Earth game. I don't know whether that's that one that you're talking about there. A long time ago, but I've not been into it for quite some time. I think, like you, it's a matter of time. I would love to. It's a very soothing thing to be painting miniatures and then actually sort of engaging in a sort of a proper strategy battle. I love board games and things like that, but yeah, it's simply a matter of time, I'm afraid.
Sam Cook, thanks so much for the super chat. Oh, we've also got a new member. Oh my word, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry, man. I feel like I need I need some phonetic help on that one. Sorry.
It's the same for all of us. Don't you worry. It's yeah, I would struggle too.
All right, Sergio Botero. Thanks so much for the super chat. The Numenorians abused many Middle-earth peoples, and yet their descendants, the Black Numenorians, allied themselves with their previously enslaved during the Third Age. Any idea how this was possible? Okay. Numenorians abused many Middle-earth peoples, yet their descendants, the Black Numenorians, allied themselves with the people who had been enslaved. Okay, so like the Black Numenorians in like Harad, for example, would have allied themselves with the Haradrim in this case. So that's kind of okay. Sorry, it took me a minute to get there. Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly didn't happen overnight, but I'm sure, the Haradrim were already, some of them at least, were coming under Sauron for quite a long time. Like Harad is a really interesting realm to me because for a while they have the Numenorians as allies, and the Numenorians are teaching them a lot, very similarly to how the elves taught the Edain. And then, even geographically on the other side, you've got Sauron and Mordor. And so Harad's kind of, between these two powers. So then when Numenor starts, abusing those relationships and taking people as, eventually it would be for human sacrifice when Sauron's in Numenor and everything. But kind of like setting them below the Numenorians and making them, pay tribute and everything. It kind of puts them in a really bad spot between Sauron and Numenor, a Numenor that's hostile. But yeah, I think the Black Numenorians obviously fall under Sauron's sway as well, and you would, I guess they would potentially set themselves up as different from the Numenorians who had abused them. I don't think that anybody under Sauron's sway is probably getting a whole lot of say in who they ally with, most likely.
No, I think that's right. I think the other, I would also take this from a slightly wider or longer historical lens. The Second Age Numenor was not just Numenor, it had two clear, distinct factions.
Yes,
you have the King's Men and you have the Faithful. And the King's Men were the ones who sort of descended down into like all the bad stuff, and Sauron eventually came over and influenced them, and it is from them we get the Black Numenorians.
Yeah.
The faithful, what's left of the faithful, come out and form eventually through Elendil's escape with his sons. They're the ones who form Gondor and Arnor.
Right.
And so what we have at a kind of a meta level is a continuation of what we had before. The faithful being Gondor and Arnor, Gondor specifically in this case, I guess, against the descendants of the king's men, really. So that's the kind of dynamic. And that means that we've got a situation of the enemy of my enemy is my friend between the Black Numenorians and the other people who see Gondor as their enemy. So yeah. I think that's how I would kind of sort of encapsulate what's going on here. Is it's just carrying on of this. I mean, Tolkien at heart is good guys versus bad guys. The good guys were a minority in Numenor, then became the big powers on Middle-earth, and the majority then became the minority or the people who were opposing the Gondorians.
Yeah. I think that's a great wrap up. Here's a question for Robert. Do you think Ramin Djawadi could have done better with the music? So first of all, tell me who that is.
That's the composer for Game of Thrones and also House of the Dragon. And he did, incidentally, he did Westworld as well, which was excellent music. In terms of Game of Thrones, now I think that's pretty iconic, is that anyone, even people who didn't watch Game of Thrones, could probably hum the theme tune to Game of Thrones. It's amazing. In terms of House of the Dragon, I don't know if that's what this is talking about. I mean, it's kind of nitpicking a bit, but they used the same theme tune again from Game of Thrones for House of the Dragon, which for me, I would have personally preferred he did a different thing. I understand they wanted to keep some kind of continuation, but this is a new show. It's a different era, slightly different feel. I kind of wanted something new. As for the music during House of the Dragon, I thought it was good. I thought it was very good. I didn't personally find that there were any standout, and I know this is a Tolkien stream, so I won't go on for too long. I didn't personally find that there were any standout moments in the same way that there were with kind of like the Light of the Seven and a few other moments in Game of Thrones, which was perfectly encapsulating the moment through music. So I thought he did really well, and it's really harsh to say, but you didn't do brilliantly. I think, he did really well for House of the Dragon. He's just, for me, he didn't quite reach the heights he did in other things.
Gotcha. So did, circling back to, they were asking with Rings of Power, what did you find to be your favorite track or theme from the soundtrack we got from Bear McCreary?
Two things from the off from first time. The Khazad-dûm theme, perfect. That just worked absolutely wonderfully for me. That felt like dwarves at the height of their power, and that's what I wanted. And then the second one, I really like the Numenor theme. I can hear the waves crashing, and I can almost I know you had Bear McCreary on your channel as well. I had him on mine.
Yeah.
One of the things he was saying when he was on mine was he's created these themes in his music that he can then, as the story progresses through later seasons, he can then adjust and change and shift according to what's happening. And with that, I can almost feel what's going to happen with that music. With Numenor. It's great, it's wonderful, everything seems fantastic, but also we've got this lingering threat coming on with this kind of waves of music coming over you that we all know where the Numenor story is going. They've shown us where the Numenor story is going. So that for me, those were the two absolute standout moments.
Yeah, I would also agree. Khazad-dûm. I thought the Strangers music was really beautiful. but then the one for me that I keep going back to is the Elendil and Isildur theme, which I love that Bear McCreary like released on Twitter, just casually dropped on Twitter that, oh yeah, that's the theme of the faithful, even though we don't call it that yet. And it's kind of like letting the cat out of the bag a little bit. Like, I mean, I think, you know, most of us would assume that there'd be some kind of tie there, but yeah, that's one where, you know, I pointed out in my review, like someone has already, you know, put it to like Elendil's death from the Fellowship prologue. And it was kind of cool how emotionally it worked. Like, you know, there's some timing things. They tried to like time it and everything. And obviously it's not composed for that edit. But the tone of it shows there's some versatility to that. But yeah, that's the one, if you guys are confused, that's the one we heard when the petals of the white tree are falling and Muriel turns and looks at Elendil, and like that was one of my favorite moments from the early half of the season, was that moment with the leaves falling and the music swells and everything. It's got, I'm not great at like, I'm not a musical minded person, but I just kind of like watch something. I'm like, oh, that's good music right there that I'm hearing. I like this. So, but yeah. So Alan, gosh, sorry. I'm just like, we're just barely into this stream too. And I'm already misreading stuff. Allison, thank you so much for the super chat. Congratulations, Matt. You have an awesome channel. I'm so glad others have found it. And I'm a huge fan of Robert as well. I'm a huge fan of Robert as well, too. Excellent work, both of you. Thanks so much, Allison.
Thank you.
All right. If you happen to see any comments, Robert, in the chat that you want to hop on, we can definitely... If you find anything interesting,
I will keep an eye. We've been keeping going with these ones.
We've been keeping going pretty well. Katharina, thanks so much for the super chat. Hi, Matt. My first super chat live stream, by the way. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the super chat about Goldberry. This is interesting. What is she exactly? Maya, Vala, Bombadillion, etc. It seems safe to presume she's not a dwarf or man. LOL. Keep up the awesome work. Robert, I'm going to let you start on this one. What do you think? What kind of being do you think Goldberry is?
Wow, great. And I hereby announce that this is such a good question. I'm going to make a video on who is Goldberry.
Nice.
I love it. So this all comes down to start with, who is Tom Bombadil, which I could talk about for about 5 hours without taking much of a breath, I suspect. But at its heart, I personally view him as a sort of an expression of Middle-earth. He is the first. He will be there until the end of Middle-earth. Mm-hmm. That's what he is. He's an expression of being, not doing. He's just the life of Middle-earth itself, an echo of the song in the music of the Aino. That's how, which is all quite ethereal. Tolkien never explicitly said what it is, but that's my kind of feel of what's going on, which makes him solid. He's set his roots in the ground. He doesn't move beyond his lands. You know, he pops up to see Farmer Maggot every now and then, but that's pretty much it. Which then takes us to, what does that make Goldberry, who he's married to? She's very clear. She's connected to the river, and she's also connected with seasons. If you listen to what she talks about, what she sings about, what she does, she's connected more with the changeableness of the world, but in a rhythm. So Tom Bombadil has his roots set into the ground. He is the expression of Middle-earth unchanging. She is the expression of Middle-earth's changing in a rhythm over time, the changing, the moving of the seasons. That's how I see it. So he is bringing gifts to her, representing changings of things and life. So that's how I see it. As I say, it's one of these things I think anyone can have an opinion and go, yeah, that could work, because Tolkien never actually wrote down exactly what Tom Bombadil was. He says he's not his words, but my paraphrasing of his words is that he's world important rather than plot important, that he needs to be there, but it's not that he plays this. Yeah, he does play a role in the plot, but it's not that you can take him out as Peter Jackson did, and you
Right.
still have a great story.
Yes.
So that's how I see it. Tom Bombadil is rooted in the unchangeableness of Middle Earth, an expression of Middle Earth. She is an expression of the changes of Middle Earth, the rhythm of nature.
Man, that's a good answer. Yeah, we often talk about Tom Bombadil. That's always the big question that floats around, and I think Goldberry gets kind of lost in the shuffle of us worrying about who Tom Bombadil is. But so what do you think about the idea that Tom, and perhaps by extension Goldberry, is a byproduct of the music of the Ainur, much like the nameless things below Moria, for example, and possibly Ungoliant, these things that have no perceivable origin, but we know they're there from the get-go. Do you think there's anything to that theory?
Yeah, absolutely. He's so connected with song. He is music. He is, and I think the way I say it, he's or conceptualize it, is that he's an echo of that music. Is that the music happened, and then he is just like this sort of it reverberating back off of the earth. That's the way I kind of imagine him working, and ditto for Goldberry. And so some of these things which are there have always been there. Then yes, they also operate in this kind of way. You see these songs dotted throughout the Lord of the Rings. It's one of the things that anyone who comes to read the Lord of the Rings for the first time, they always say. I don't know. They always say, there's songs or
so
poems.
Many songs.
Exactly. It's like, yes, this is such an important part of how Tolkien viewed his world. It is about song. Song started it, or music started all of this. And so when you're thinking about the world itself, it is song. It is an expression of that. It's an echo of what we had to start with.
I will say, Tom's songs and his, ring-a-dong-de-loo, it makes me
hey doll, merry doll.
Like the way you put it is like it's a reverberation of the music. Makes me think like maybe I've been thinking of the music of the Ainur totally different than it actually was, because I imagine it as like this angelic, flowing thing, and maybe they're all up there ding dong ding dong, and that's how Arda comes to be. That would be quite the interesting adaptation if someone took the Tom Bombadil route to the music of the Ainur.
It absolutely would. Yes, I mean, when we ever do, which we're probably not in my lifetime, but if we ever got like the Silmarillion on a big screen somewhere, if they suddenly broke out into that as being that would be amazing.
That would be a bold move.
Yes, courageous.
They would say it would be someone saying, "We're making up for all the times that Bombadil's been cut out. We are singing in his fashion for the creation of the world." That would be the only, that would be what they would be doing in that moment. Sebastian, thanks so much for the super chat. Love the channel. What do you think will be the major story arcs of season 2 of Rings of Power, and how do you think the season will end? Sauron goes to Numenor, end of the War of the Elves and Sauron, etc. So I haven't put a ton of thought into what the arc could be for season 2. Like Robert, you kind of mentioned earlier, we kind of have to see Sauron overtake Mordor. He currently has no army right now that we know of, at least. I mean, unless he's been behind the scenes, recruiting Haradrim and warriors from Rune, Easterlings and stuff. I'm assuming that he's going to take over leadership of the orcs at some point in season 2. The big arcs that we kind of talked a little bit earlier. I think it would be really odd for the end of season 2 to be creating more rings. Like like you can't make the finale just the first 3 seasons like creating rings at the end of each season. It would be kind of lame. So I would actually anticipate that coming fairly early-ish. And then, Robert, you kind of alluded to, we've heard rumors there's going to be a big battle. I would almost guess that maybe season 2 ends with the sack of Eregion and the death of Celebrimbor and Sauron claiming the 16 rings. And maybe we get like a cliffhanger ending where, Sauron is laying waste to Eregion. I think the farthest I could see this going would be Numenor coming to aid and defeating Sauron in the War of the Elves and Sauron. I kind of think that's how this is going to play out. Like Farazan is going to bring an army at some point and help the elves defeat Sauron, and then he's just going to be taken directly back to Numenor from that. That's just a theory of mine based on the whole time compression thing. So yeah, I think so. Long story short, I think at most we might see Sauron on his way to Numenor, but no Sauron really affecting Numenor. But it might end even earlier, and maybe season 3 opens with more war. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, so we've got a few different theaters of action still going on here. The main thread, I think we're in broad agreement on this. With the main thread, Sauron has to somehow claim Mordor. That means dealing somehow with what's going with Adar and the orcs. They have to come onto his side in some way. The rings have to be forged. I don't know whether they'll be able to resist having the forging of the One Ring as being the finale of season 2. It seems it has to be a big moment because it is the big moment. So I don't know whether they can resist doing that. But I do like the idea of what you were saying about yes, I think we're going to have the sacking of Eregion, and I just there's this bit in this sort of the second half of that is Elrond sort of comes in. It's quite epic when you actually just read Tolkien, skims through it, but like the dwarves come out and sort of charge up against them, and then they get pushed back and they shut the doors of Khazad-dûm. We get Celeborn arrives. Maybe we can cover Celeborn another time. Elrond is there, and Elrond he rescues a few survivors and then goes off and hides away and is besieged in this hidden valley, which he then turns into like this fortress, which eventually becomes Rivendell, and this is the start of Rivendell. So I could certainly see this is kind of like an end kind of scene as like him coming into this valley and going, this would make a good home or something, something kind of cheesy like that. But this is all missing the other elements that we've got, because we've got 3 other huge plot lines which have to be woven somehow into all of this. They didn't explain at all how, if you've got these rings, how do you actually stop the elves from fading? Because as far as we're aware, Gil-galad now thinks that all the elves are about to fade and is presumably going to be trying to put them all onto boats and send them off west. So I'm guessing then Galadriel and Elrond head off and say, don't worry, we've got these rings. All we have to do is, I don't know what, they haven't explained
wear
it,
them.
Wave the rings at people, whatever it is.
Oh no, Robert.
So that dealt with. Oh, I'm sorry, am I still...
There we go. You're good.
Excellent. So we get that. And then with the second bit, sort of subplot, is Numenor. We've got a king just died, so we've got we will have a whole load of stuff going on there, I imagine, for probably a few episodes, where we get Miriel arriving. Everybody's going to be distraught. How dare they be those nasty orcs be blinding our new queen? Farazan is going to be plotting his coup. We're going to have a whole load of stuff there before a decision is made. We're going to go out in proper force, because they basically said we're only going to send 3 boats first time round, and now they're going to get angry and send a whole load more. So that's another plot. And then the third plot is obviously Nori and the stranger heading east, which is away from all the other action. So I can only assume that is going to tie in with finding I don't know, Hamul the Easterling or something like that. Maybe that is, but at the moment they're going away from the rest of the plot, after a whole season of not being involved in the rest of the plot.
Yeah.
So that's another. So there are lots of strands, but I think broadly speaking, we know which bits of the story they should be covering.
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, like I don't expect Farzan to seize control necessarily in season 2. Like I think I would kind of, well, I almost expect that to happen. It's tricky because if he comes and helps the elves, and then if they're going to do, Sauron gets directly taken back to Numenor, then it's almost like Sauron is leading him to take control, when I think we need to see him do that of his own accord. I do think that Muriel's disability might be some kind of impetus for Farzan taking over, and yeah, I'm very curious, and I'm curious to see if she uses the Palantir now that her actual eyes are not working, obviously. I wonder if she'll use the Palantir in some way there. But yeah, we've got some political dynamics going on in Numenor. The strange, I'm very curious to see where the stranger factors into the grander story. I made the point in my review, like you could cut out that story entirely and it doesn't really change the plot of the show.
Yeah.
So and they're heading off, like you said, they're heading off to Rune, and like all the action's going to be in, most likely, Mordor, Numenor, and Eriador. So where are they going to connect? Like, is this going to be an ongoing thing? It almost feels like it's its own spin-off show that might connect somewhere down the line or something. It's very interesting. But especially if they're only doing 8 episodes, like I'm curious to see, you pointing that out makes me think it's even more likely that we end on a Sauron sacking Eregion cliffhanger. Like he has demolished Eregion. Elrond and Celeborn are, have fled to what will be Rivendell. The dwarves go in and shut their halls, and now Sauron's looking toward Lindon. Like, I'm gonna keep this going. I'm gonna crush everybody, and then we leave it at that, and maybe it has a bit of a downer, cliffhanger kind of ending for season 2. It's hard to say. Who knows?
Darker second season.
Yeah, it could be. Star Wars Explained, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, fun. It's always fun talking Star Wars stuff too. Are you into Star Wars, Robert? I know you don't cover it, but do you like Star Wars?
I don't cover it, but yeah, I am. It's one of those things. As somebody who covers, and you'll probably discover this yourself as you're expanding out into things like Star Wars. It's actually really nice to have some things that I just love and really enjoy doing
privately,
without watching something and having to analyze it all the time. I could happily watch Andor and go, wow, I love this. This is great, and I'm really looking forward to The Mandalorian. But I don't feel like I have to go through and go, oh, I just wonder what that nerdy detail there was all about. It's really good. So yeah, I do enjoy it. I wouldn't call myself an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fun thing, and I probably watched like 90% of all the Star Wars stuff available. So
yeah, and that's for me right now. That's Last of Us. I just started watching that yesterday, and I totally like blew through it. And then like last night I had my wife watch it with me again. So like I watched all 3 episodes, and then the first 2 again. Was as far as we got. But yeah, like it was really, really good. And I'm like, now I have to play the video game because I don't know like how this compares at all, but it was really good what I've seen so far. Senju, thanks for the super chat. Alan Wiles, have you ever done a full review of the PJ films? Adaptations equal compromise. Don't get why some people have rose-tinted glasses over the PJ films and get negative about the Rings of Power series. So this brings up a good point, because I've seen a lot, and I think it goes into some of what we were talking about earlier, where people feel like you have to be 100% on one side or the other. Like, at least that's the context that I've seen some similar comments, where I've also seen the argument like PJ changed things so you shouldn't complain about Rings of Power changing things, which I would push back on a little bit. So yes, PJ changed things, but I can't also pretend like those aren't some of the greatest films of all time as well. And Rings of Power does not have that luxury. Like if they created a story that was just drop dead awesome and captivating as all heck, then you kind of forgive some of the changes a little bit more. You have a little bit more leniency. For me, that would have been the creation of the Rings of Power. Like if all this stuff, because I mean, look at the entire season, the vast majority of it is original to the show, which is fine. Like, especially with the Second Age, that's going to happen because we just have scattered notes. You know, we have bits and pieces, and there's a lot of blanks to fill in. And that was something I knew from the get-go. And, you know, I think anyone expecting, like, you know, I don't know what some folks are expecting when they say, like, just do it like the books. It's like, well, do you just want someone to, like, read you some synopses or something? Because I don't know, you know, there's going to be original creations in any adaptation, but especially the Second Age. Like, there's going to be original elements. For me, it comes down to they have to nail those canon moments, which I just don't think they did with the creation of the ring. So, and I kind of made this point in my review too. Like, a lot of the things with the Peter Jackson films, I can understand the logic behind it. Whereas some of my biggest gripes with Rings of Power are because I don't see the logic behind it. And so that's where the disconnect comes for me. So yes, there's changes in Peter Jackson films. Yes, there's changes in Rings of Power. Yes, there'll be changes in War of the Rohirrim whenever it comes out. My measuring stick is going to be, are the changes understandable, even if I don't like them? So, like, an example in Peter Jackson's films, like, I don't like that the Witch King breaks Gandalf's staff. I hate that because I love the book version so much. But I understand why he did it, because dramatically, it puts you in this emotional, like, pit of despair, because Gandalf is, you know, he's Gandalf the White. He is like this seemingly invincible force, and he just had his staff broken. So emotionally, it brings you down to the pit right before the Rohirrim show up, and then you get that catastrophe moment. That being said, I don't really care for that that change, but I can understand the logic behind it. And, you know, as long as they nailed plenty of other moments along the way, that I give them some leeway in moments like that where I don't like the change. Yeah, I've rambled quite long enough. Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with that. The bits I think I would add into that is that it's not just understanding why they made the change; it's sympathizing with what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Is that so? Like, for me, the bit that I really hate is when Frodo turns on Sam and Sam abandons Frodo, and I was just like, no. That's not what happens. That's against their characters. But again, I understand why, because they wanted to show Gollum's influence there. They wanted to show the hopelessness of the situation. I understood it. I disagree, but I understood. The problem I have with some of the changes in the Rings of Power is more that I understand why they did it, but I disagree with the reasons why they did it. So they make a lot of the changes that I disagree with seem to have been in order to fit in with this idea that they had at the start of wanting to structure this as a kind of a mystery box. They want things to be, and I could talk about this idea for a long time, but they wanted this to be a surprise for everyone. They didn't want book readers to be ahead of anyone, so they wanted, so they had to make changes to a huge amount of things to keep stuff disguised and secret and things like that. And I disagree with that, because I do not think that wasn't how Tolkien wrote. That means it makes it feel less like Tolkien. But the fundamental thing that because I like all of us, have thought about this quite a lot about adaptations and what's my approach to adaptations. Because I agree with you, is that you have to do some adaptations to go from page to screen regardless. And the analogy I've come down to is it's a bit like if a band does a cover version of one of your favorite songs. Now, you could like that cover version, you could hate that cover version. The cover version could be quite close to your song, or they could do something completely different to it. But the fact remains that, first of all, you don't have to listen to that cover version if you don't want to. Your favorite song's still there. You just go to it on Spotify, you listen to it. That's absolutely. And so if you don't like the changes that have happened in Nerd of the Rings, I was looking at the screen in front of me. If you don't like Nerd of the Ring, if you don't like in the Rings of Power, then you don't have to watch it. That's absolutely fine. You've always got the Lord of the Rings there in front of you, and hopefully, and I have seen this happen, I'm sure you've seen this happen, when you get somebody who does a cover version of your favorite song, people who like the cover version then go and listen to the original song. And that's the same that we have with the Rings of Power, is that there are so many people who have watched the Rings of Power and gone, hey, this world's quite cool, I wonder what the original's like, and then they've discovered Lord of the Rings. And we just imagine everybody, because we're so involved in this, we imagine everybody knows the Lord of the Rings. There are so many people who haven't, and the amount of people who've said to me, I've started reading the Lord of the Rings because I got excited by this, because I've been watching the videos, I've been listening to the chat, that really works for me. So that's the kind of analogy that I've got, is it's just if you enjoy it, great. If you don't, that's fine.
Right. Yeah, totally. I'm in 100% agreement. And going back to one of your further points, I've kind of thought the same way. One of your earlier points, is I've kind of thought the same way, that it seems like, there were some decisions made very early on that determined how they bent the story to fit that mold, instead of, the story that Tolkien laid down kind of dictating the path. So, the mystery box thing is kind of is the big glaring example of this, where it's not something that Tolkien does in his books. Like, there's mysteries here and there, but you wonder for what, like a couple pages who Strider is, and then and then it's like, oh, I've got this sword. I'm super important, guys. I'm a good guy. Surprise. It's not like this, book long thing, and then at the end of the book you find out, oh my gosh, Strider is, this important person. Like, we find out naturally as the story unfolds. It's not, it was very much structured for this big reveal, and we had all these candidates of who Sauron is, and it just felt very foreign. And you said everything wonderfully there, so I would just agree with what you said essentially. But yeah, at the end of the day, whether the show is good, bad, or in the middle, I'm still gonna have the books, so I'm not gonna get overly bent out of shape. Like, I'll be, as people who watched my review, I got kind of snarky at a couple points, because I get fired up about things, but I'm not going to lose my mind over it. I'll convey my disappointments, and, like things that on the flip side, things I love, like, oh my gosh, Numenor looks amazing. Like, that's kind of fun to picture in my head now that we've seen that. But yeah, like, the way that the creation of the rings takes place in the show, that has not replaced or affected in my mind whatsoever how it plays out in the text. Like, that is the canon version that is stored in my memory bank, and it always will be. And yeah, I think Higgy says I'm secretly flipping tables over Mithril off camera. No, I would cause way too much of a mess. I throw things instead, so not flipping tables. Get your facts straight, Higgy.
What I will say, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Matt, but there were a couple of episodes of Rings of Power where after, when I watched it, it was early in the morning for me, but it might have been like late at night for you. We would just on Twitter just have this I don't know, like 20 minutes or so of to and fro DMing each other,
Yes. Yeah.
just letting off a bit of steam about
Yeah.
one random geeky thing that we've just got really annoyed about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, don't think, I'm sure you don't, but don't think this guy doesn't care passionately about Tolkien's original text, because he absolutely fundamentally does. But he just loves good content. So yeah, it's I enjoyed those little to and fro's we had. It was good fun.
Yeah, no. So yeah, the Mithril thing was definitely one where we had some good back and forths. Like, what on earth did we just watch? Like, what is this? And trying to make sense of it, and like, you know, saying, okay, well, we've got a few episodes left. We'll see. You know, maybe this is, you know, Elrond calls it apocryphal, so maybe it's not going to be, you know, a real thing. And then the Mithril cures the leaf, and you're like, oh gosh, that's a real thing, I guess. Okay, they just did that. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, like, Robert and I are both kind of the same mind here. You know, it's only worth getting worked up so much about. Like, in the moment, you're like, I don't really like that. But at the end of the day, you know, more people are coming to the books, which is the best way to experience Middle Earth anyway. So yeah, like I, you know, I'm not going to get mad at people who don't like the show. I'm not going to be mad at people who do like the show. Like, that's silly. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room for anywhere in between. And, you know, we're going to be frustrated by things and, you know, happy about other things. And yeah, it's all part of this, this new journey we're on as we see more adaptations from Tolkien's world, I guess. Alessandro, thanks for the super chat. Love your videos, Matt. For my mental sanity, I need to know how to find the amazing music you've put in your Rings of Power review video. I don't know off the top of my head which music I use for that. So I will say, okay, so if you guys like the music in my videos, one of the artists that I will recommend to you, go on Spotify and look up Kyle Preston. He does a lot of the music that I've licensed for my videos, and you'll no doubt recognize some staples, including my outro music is one of his tracks. So definitely check him out. Kyle Preston on Spotify. You'll have a nice list just from that. Berto Berg, let's keep this party going. All right. I'm getting to your comment like half an hour after you posted it. So I think we're doing that. Fingers Tighten. Here's an interesting one. Question. The talk about WB being asked to give up the rights to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit at the end of 2023. So it's funny because Robert and I were also talking about this before we got on, and we're both kind of like, I don't even know what's going on. Like I see posts once in a while like, oh, this company's been asked to do this thing, and you know, they're fighting over rights. I mean, it's nothing new with Tolkien rights, for sure, for people to be fighting over something, or, you know, royalties or whatever. It seems like it happens every time a new adaptation comes out, just about. But yeah, I don't really, I have zero information other than like what has been posted on tweets and stuff. I mean, I'm curious. Like, I would actually like more films in Middle Earth. I think I've said it. I think I've said it on here before, but I posted on Twitter the other day that I kind of think it would be cool and possibly for the best overall products if the film rights and TV rights were not with the same company. And maybe that's part of me just like, you know, intrigued by the chaos that might ensue. But the idea of like two studios competing to make the best Middle Earth products is very intriguing to me. And I could see, you know, so like Amazon obviously has TV rights right now. And imagine if Warner Brothers or, I don't know, Apple, whoever had movie rights, and they're over here making films. Amazon's over here making TV shows, and they're like fighting over who can make the best stuff. I feel like that could be a win for the fans potentially. I don't know. Maybe it's disaster in the making. Who knows?
Yeah, I think one thing I always say whenever we get into this rights thing is that I have talked to, and I know Matt has talked to lots of people who you would expect to know who holds the rights to what. And genuinely, most of these people haven't got the foggiest idea. The moment they start talking about it, they then start going into like incredibly nuanced levels of detail, and then just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, "Well, the lawyers would have to decide." We can talk about who holds the rights for what, but it is so complicated. It's just if we can get more Middle Earth content, I would be delighted. I would agree with you 100%, Matt. We're so used to like having a franchise being owned by one group or party. It's like Game of Thrones. Everything in that world is owned by HBO. Is it Warner Brothers? Whoever owns the Harry Potter stuff. We're used to that kind of thing. But I'd love, and it's now obviously public domain out of copyright. But things like Sherlock Holmes, I love the way that you get a different interpretation of these different things. You get one trying to do something completely, let's just recreate what Conan Doyle wrote. Someone else saying, here's the heart of the character, let's just go with that and try and put it in a modern setting. Here's someone else. And I love that. I think that adds this extra layer of possible brilliance to it. So if we can have lots of different people doing it, that's probably not the way that the Tolkien estate make the most money, but you know, that's if we can have more people able to make stuff, that would be fantastic in my world.
Yeah, and like if it does all end up at the same studio, like I hope, you know, it's run well, and you know, that there's an emphasis on quality over quantity. I think a lot of people fear like a lot of people point to Marvel as successful as that is. It kind of gets to the point where there's so much coming out, it's overwhelming, and you just get a lot of like kind of so stuff. Like I'm not huge into Marvel, and I've skipped a lot of things over this past. What phase are we on now? 4 maybe. I've skipped some of those and like started watching some and didn't finish watching just because it was so much stuff that I'm like, it's just kind of all okay right now. Or at least a lot of it. And so, yeah, I hope, you know, whatever happens, I hope that the emphasis with Tolkien is always on quality over quantity. Yeah. Brown Eyes of Mandalore. I like the Mandalorian play on the name there, Brown Eyes. Could you please explain how exactly the elves of Middle-earth had any reason to fear decay, therefore leading to their acceptance of Anatar? So they, unlike in Rings of Power, which you might pick up from Rings of Power, you might assume, is that it's the decay of themselves, when in actuality it's the fear of decay of the lands. The earth itself is decaying, like, you know, the world itself naturally is growing older, becoming a little less magical, and you know, the world is just in this, you know, constant state of decay. So that's why with the Rings of Power, their whole thing is they don't want to go back to Valinor, which would be the easy thing to do. They want to rule their own realms. You know, if they go back to Valinor, the Valar are the ones in charge there. They just take up residence. Whereas in Middle Earth, they're ruling their own realms. This is a big thing with Galadriel, you know, in her younger, I should say. You know, she's very prideful. She has this desire. You know, all these people who follow Feanor into exile, they have this desire to go rule realms of their own. And you know, we finally get past the first age with Morgoth. He's cast into the void. We got rid of the bad guy, but guess what? The world is growing older, and eventually, our realms are not going to be as beautiful and glorious as we want them to be. So that's where the rings come in, and you'll notice, you know, the realms that are, by the time of Lord of the Rings, the realms that are the most beautiful and otherworldly seeming. You look at the way Rivendell and Lorien are described, and they are described like no other place in Middle Earth, and that's because Elrond and Galadriel have rings of power and are able to protect their realms from this decay of time.
Yeah, and the only thing I think I'd add to that, I thought that was really helpful and concise sort of explanation there. I think the only thing I'd add, Tolkien did, I think it was in one of the letters, he did actually set out the elf thinking, which you kind of touched on there, when he basically, he said, yeah, they realized if they went back to Valinor, then they'd be like at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they like being in charge. And it actually, when you think about it, that's that the elves are not perfect. Peter Jackson, one of the sort of the meta things that I kind of disagreed with, he made all of the elves this kind of ethereal, beautiful, perfect beings, but they're not. They were there because they wanted to rule. They enjoyed everybody looking up to them and thinking they were amazing, and they just wanted to have their cake and eat it. They wanted to be there in charge, but also have all of the undyingness of the Undying Lands where they were. So it's really not a good motivation if you get down to the heart of it. It's not them just thinking, I want to make this world beautiful. It's them wishing to cling on to something that is not rightfully where they belong.
Yeah. I think he does use the phrase, they wanted to have their cake and eat it. I think he does use that phrase in his letter.
It's something very close to that, I think.
Yeah. Pod ones. Hey guys. Congrats, Matt. 900K. What an amazing accomplishment. Cheers from your friend Luke from the Pod ones. Thanks so much, Luke. Oh, Angel, one of our awesome moderators here. Thanks so much, Angel. Congratulations again, Matt. 1 million subs. Here we come. We'll see. It might be a little long of a road, but I'm hoping. I never count chickens before they're hatched, so to speak, but hopefully we hit that at some point. Thanks for letting us all be a huge part of this. Well, thank you, Angel, and the entire moderator team. You guys do a wonderful job of keeping this a place where hopefully, people can talk and even disagree respectfully with each other. We always encourage that here. Artisto, maybe? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Rosansky, thank you for all your content. You help slackers like me who didn't read all the books to learn and appreciate so much of Tolkien's work in detail, which would never be possible without a big time investment. Robert and I both, I guess, we are like the cliff notes of, of your reading. So hopefully we pull you in. I always enjoy when people share that they take the plunge into the books because of our content, and hopefully we can reel you in at some point.
And I would just say, if you're the time investment, here's me trying to send people away from our channels, which is clearly bad, but the time investment in watching the amount of content I've put out, and I'm sure Matt has put out about Lord of the Rings, if you've just got the audiobooks, and there are some excellent versions of audiobooks, then that would be, I'm always trying to push people to the audiobooks, because you can, as that person did when he's exercising and driving at the same time, then that's referenced right at the very beginning of the stream for people who think I'm talking nonsense, but you can actually just imbibe the story in a way that it feels less of a time investment.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that topic, because I'm also a huge audiobook guy, which of all of the Tolkien audiobooks of the various kinds is your favorite?
Well, my favorite absolutely is the BBC. It's not just because I'm British, but the BBC radio adaptation, which, and it's got a special place in my heart. So it's a personal thing. Is that this was when I was as a child, my dad had this on cassette tapes and played it in the car when we were going on family journeys, and then he upgraded to CDs, and so this has always been in my life, but trying to be objective about it, it is probably the closest to the original in terms of like not actually somebody reading the book out to you, but as an adaptation, and some of the audio performances are amazing. Bill Nye is as Sam. Who else you got? Michael Hordern as Gandalf is absolutely amazing.
Ian Holm is
Ian
Frodo.
Holm as Frodo. Yeah, so you get some fantastic performances in there. So that's probably my favorite of all of them. But I would humbly, just because it's the most recent one I've listened to, I would humbly put before people the Fall of Numenor, the most recent thing which came out, which I don't know in terms of sort of dramatic presentation, it's probably not in the same kind of category, but in terms of if you are wanting a breakdown, I wasn't expecting this actually when I first got the book, but as a breakdown of the Second Age, not just about Numenor, about what happened over the entire Second Age, with lots of really interesting digressions into random things here and there.
Yeah,
that's really good. So I would highly recommend people check that out, either in book form or it is as an audiobook.
Yeah, I actually just started listening to Fall of Numenor. I'm probably about a third of the way through it right now. Yeah, so I was also going to say the BBC adaptation. It's my absolute favorite. And it's right up there. It's such a different experience listening to that than watching like Peter Jackson's films, but they are both. I mean, guys, you know how much I love Peter Jackson's films. Like BBC is like right there with it. And honestly, like you could totally make the argument, and I have on occasion that it is the most faithful adaptation of Tolkien's works. It's got more songs than the Peter Jackson versions, which is fun. Like we were talking about how foundational songs are to Tolkien's world. And then the other one that I would put forth, so that's kind of a category in itself. Like it's audiobook kind of format because you can get it on audiobook platforms. One that's a straight like reading by a narrator that I would put forward is The Children of Hurin, which is read by Christopher Lee, who so famously played Saruman in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And that is one that when I discovered it, I was initially under the impression that it was Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Silmarillion, and that was kind of it for things that told more or less narrative. And then you find out Children of Hurin, like, oh, this is actually more of a narrative than the Silmarillion even. Like this is a self-contained story, and Christopher Lee's performance of it, the fact that we get dialogue from both Morgoth and Glaurung, which are two of Tolkien's greatest villains. There's so much I love there. Spoiler warning, it is a bit of a downer. So if you're not prepared for that aspect, might not be your thing if you're wanting happy endings. But I mean, you should know First Age stuff does not always have or often have the happiest endings. Ever?
I don't know. I don't know. Beren and Luthien, they had a happy. But that one thing, while I think of it, if you want something just to bring joy into your life, though, you can just go. It's on YouTube. Do Bill Nye as Sam singing Gil-galad was an Elven king. It's just the most. It's only like a minute of your time, but it's just beautiful. It's just absolutely wonderful. As I say, we all know who Bill Nye is as an actor, but imagine him as Sam, completely in character, just singing in such a simple, wonderful.
Yeah, it blew my mind when I realized that was the same person. I was like, wait a minute, the Davy Jones guy from Pirates of the Caribbean, like this the same guy played Sam. Like that's crazy. But yeah, his performance is fantastic, and you'll actually, if you listen to that BBC radio drama, you'll be surprised how closely the actors in that match with the actors in the Peter Jackson films.
Well, he made them listen to it, some of them.
Yeah. So that was one of the things I was going to say. When I interviewed Brian Sibley, who wrote it, he said when he went down to visit, he's walking through Weta and stuff, and they've got the BBC drama playing in the background. And Peter Jackson was a huge fan of him. And it's crazy because like if you listen to a character like Theoden, for example, even without them saying who it is, you could probably guess who it is based on the performance of and the voice of the actor. So it's pretty cool. I felt like there was something else I was going to add on to that, but I can't remember it. So we'll just go to the next one. Master Chief, thanks so much for the super chat. Hey, huge fan of Lord of the Rings and wanting to get into the lore / Silmarillion. Are there any tools like a family tree that you would recommend that might help? Thanks. So I would recommend what was super helpful to me and what was something that was very foundational in me getting to the point in my Tolkien knowledge is Tolkien Gateway, which is a website. It's like a wiki, but it is greater than any wiki that any other fandom has. Like, it is the absolute best. So you can get in there and learn so much, go down such wonderful rabbit holes. So if you come across someone in your reading and you're like, wait, who's this character? You type it in on there, and I mean, you could find out all kinds of history. So I don't think I've mentioned this before, but like, you know, when I was in college, my roommate who introduced me to Lord of the Rings actually passed away in a car accident, and it was like just a really tough time for me personally. And one of the things that I took comfort in was diving into Middle Earth, and that's where a lot of, you know, this first you know, I love the movies already, but like the love of the deeper lore and everything really took hold in me, was being able to retreat to Middle Earth in times of trouble. And Tolkien Gateway was a big part of that, because, you know, I could just hop on and I would just read for like an hour or two at a time, and just dive in and learn all these obscure facts. So yeah, I would recommend that. That's a great resource. Also, in the appendices of Lord of the Rings, you asked about family trees in particular. I know there's a good number of family trees for you to peruse in the appendices. Robert, you have any other tools you'd recommend?
I mean, this big thumbs up to Tolkien Gateway. I would agree with that completely. If you're wanting to hunt, this is maybe not intro stuff, but if you're wanting to hunt for stuff, then Digital Tolkien Project is absolute must. You can just search for any word and it tells you where it is in pretty much all of the major Tolkien things.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would say, just in terms of reading order, a lot of people want to dive into the Silmarillion after reading the Lord of the Rings. It is such a different style.
Yeah.
Personally, I say, I mean, I think now Fall of Numenor is a great place to go, but personally, I recommend Unfinished Tales, which people think of as being like extra nerdy detail, but it's basically just this collection of small snippets and bits and pieces of things you might find interesting, like an essay about the Palantiri. What actually is a Palantir? That's fascinating. What's the history of Galadriel? Oh, I'll go and have a look at that. Let's hear Gandalf explaining the backstory to what happened in The Hobbit and what he was, that kind of thing. And so you could just literally flick through and find a thing you think is. Oh, here's a list of the kings of Numenor. I'll have a look. That kind of thing is just, it's, if you just want to dig into things, it feels a bit like you were talking about with Tolkien Gateway. It's just find a thing that you like, and you're getting literally just what Tolkien wrote about that subject. So I'd recommend Unfinished Tales before diving into the Silmarillion.
Yeah, that's a great one. I also, in my reading order, which I guess I need to update because there's been a couple books come out since I did my reading order video. I always recommend Children of Hurin before the Silmarillion, because it is just a straight story. There's a lot fewer characters that you have to keep track of. And it's not, I think the language isn't quite as cumbersome as Silmarillion tends to be. Very, you know, it reads kind of like the King James Bible at some points. You know, it can get very very wordy, and you're like, what, you know, there's times where I would read the same paragraph a couple times and be like, what am I reading here? Whereas I think Children of Hurin, you know, like I said, there's fewer characters to keep track of. There's more dialogue and stuff like that. Always helps keep me going through a book more than, you know, kind of the higher style of writing that's more talking about events and stuff. So yeah, I often recommend Children of Hurin and then dive into Silmarillion, because I feel like it prepares you for that type of writing. Online college dropout asks, is there an Eomer video coming in 2023? Well, there is now. I guess I should make one. I do love the Rohirrim. Who doesn't love the Rohirrim, right? Speaking of Rohirrim, okay, so we haven't talked about War of the Rohirrim. And I may end up doing a video on this later, but Robert, what are you hoping for in War of the Rohirrim? Since that's kind of, I guess it is, aside from video games, you know, I kind of put them in two different categories. Like I'm a little more forgiving of video games. Like I've said before, like Shadow of War, like Shadow of Mordor, like go for the awesome gaming experience, not for the lore, you know? I'm kind of forgiving. Like if a video game's fun to play, then it's like, okay, they totally butchered that lore, but man, is this game fun. But on the adaptation side, we've got War of the Rohirrim is kind of our next big project, the anime coming from Warner Brothers. What are you looking forward to in that, or what do you hope to see in that?
What I hope to see is something which is accurate to the text. Now, and the text, for those who don't know, we do have the story, but it's not like a massively long story. It's sort of like a cut down, just a few pages of basically we have from Tolkien. But it should be a Tolkien story, but have a different feel to pretty much everything we've seen on screen so far, because it should be gritty. It should be heroic, but dark. The main character, we should Hellhammer Hand. He's heroic, but also I kind of don't like him. I don't want him to succeed because he does some really horrible stuff, and I want that kind of layered approach to Tolkien. That I sometimes feel that the versions of Tolkien that gets put out into the wider world, things like the Peter Jackson stuff, the Rings of Power, it plays into this stereotype that a lot of the wider world has, that Tolkien is just, there are good guys and there are bad guys, and it's a battle of good versus evil.
Sorry, you froze up a little bit. Repeat that last
sorry,
bit. There's good guys and there's bad guys. Yeah.
Good guys and bad guys, and it's a battle of good against evil, which is true. That is what Tolkien's about. But his characters are so layered, and we often don't see that. And I hope in this we actually see those layers. We can see that someone can be both heroic and not a guy you want to cheer on at the same time. So that's what I'm hoping for, and I'm hoping to be as accurate as possible with this one, as to the story that we have.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's kind of not all that dissimilar from the Rings of Power Second Age situation, where we have like these mile markers, or gosh, what was the word you used? We have these
tent poles.
Yes, we have these tent poles. We have these points in the story. Like, if we don't see Helm Hammerhand earn his nickname, and I'll try not to spoil it too much, but if we don't see how he earns his nickname, that would be a huge miss. But I fully anticipate that we will, because it's pretty epic how he does. And like you said, he is, you know, at the end of the day, he's definitely the more heroic of the character, of the characters in the conflict. We would lean toward him being in the right, but we don't look at him and say like, yeah, I would have done it like that, But yeah, I think for me, I've said a couple times before that I think there could be some really, really interesting connections to what we've seen in the Peter Jackson films. The one that I keep going back to is Eowyn, when she says, women of this country learned long ago that those without swords can still die upon them. And given what we've been hinted at, and the concept art where we see like a Mumik storming into Edoras, I think we could see, what those, it's kind of this term that gets thrown out, Shield Maiden of Rohan. We know that Eowyn is one. We don't really know. There's like one conflict that it specifically mentions the Shield Maidens, but other than that, it's kind of this thing, like, yeah, it existed, but by the time of Eowyn, like, they're not, it's not really this thing where they're taking part in battles. So what, it kind of gives them a little bit of freedom to explore that. So I think that quote in particular, my hope is that this is a good adaptation that, gets the story right from a Tolkien perspective, and is just a good story and a well executed story, period. But then I think the thing with a prequel is it should, you know, enhance your viewing of the original thing. So, like in this case, this is a prequel to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, in a way. I think it would be really cool if we see that moment with Eowyn later, and we know what she's talking about when she says that line about, women learning long ago that those without swords could still die upon them. We could, in our minds, think to War of the Rohirrim, like, oh my gosh, yeah, like that was really bad, huh?
Mm.
Another example, seeing the concept artwork from John Howe, and I think Alan Lee is on it as well. I think they brought them both back, and seeing the Mumik storming Edoras, I immediately think, like, okay, whatever takes place in this story, these are stories that the Rohirrim of the Third Age would be familiar with, or the late Third Age, I should say. So these are stories that Theoden, Eowyn, Eomer, all these characters would have grown up hearing of these stories. And seeing a single Mumik, or maybe two Mumikil, storming Edoras, and then in Return of the King, when Theoden turns his head and sees a wall of Mumikil marching toward his forces, and his face just drops, like, it could add some interesting extra weight to moments like this, if it's done well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a thing that I was just reminded of recently, where in this is not too hoping not too much of digression, but in the films you get Theoden gets that moment at the very end, when he can see, when he knows what she's been, he
Oh
knows
yeah,
that she's there protecting. That's not there in the books.
right.
It's actually a lot more tragic, and we get Merry, who is there, who's about to tell him, and then he suddenly can't tell him what Eowyn was doing because the Mumikil start coming.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy, is that he dies without knowing. In the way in on the film, then Peter Jackson obviously wanted, a happy-ish ending there for
Yeah.
Theoden.
Yeah.
But in the books, it's so much more tragic, and it is the Mumikil that cause this lack of him dying knowing
Lack of
what
closure.
Eowyn's.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. And that, again, like going back to our earlier conversations, like that's a change, an adaptational change that I kind of understand, because they wanted that final scene between Eowyn and Theoden, which is a really emotional scene. I think it plays really well. So, but yeah, but it, like you said, it is a change, and there's definitely that extra element of sorrow that, because we know as the reader, like, Eowyn's right there, like,
Yeah.
she's right over there. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what comes of War of the Rohirrim. I don't know when we might get a trailer for that. It's supposed to be April 2024. So I would imagine maybe a year out we might get a teaser. That might be too long. I don't know.
We might get a teaser, I guess. But yeah, I wouldn't imagine they'll actually start ramping it up until, a few months before it's
Yeah,
actually
6
there.
months maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. With it coming out in April, I would think that December, the 20th anniversary of Return of the King, might be the time where they really, that might be like a full trailer drop kind of thing. Because then you're about 4 months out from release. Everyone is talking about the 20th anniversary of Return of the King. It's the most awarded, movie in history, all that stuff. Like that could be a cool tie-in.
It could, and there's also we have to, and I don't think it will be then, but Rings of Power Season 2 will be coming out in next year as well at some point. So they'll want to try and make sure that they don't get too bogged up in like the in the same way that House of the Dragon and Rings of Power did, which I think was to the detriment of both of them, to be honest.
I think it probably was, honestly, that they were completely overlapping. Katharina, thanks for a super chat. If you can meet Professor Tolkien and ask him only 3 questions, what would they be? So 3 questions. You could start an hours-long conversation with 3 questions, potentially. So also, thanks for introducing me to the Prancing Pony podcast. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'm currently recording episodes as a guest co-host on the Prancing Pony podcast.
Oh, wow.
Over there with Alan. Yeah, so we have actually, after this stream, I'm going to record my 4th episode, and then Thursday we're going to have a live recording. So for people who are also supporters of the Prancing Pony podcast, we'll be recording a live episode tomorrow. So you'll get to hear me make all kinds of mistakes that I edit out of my regular videos. You'll get to hear them all tomorrow. But yeah, so I'm going to let you take this one first, Robert. 3 questions.
3 questions. Okay, let's go. I mean, I think the first one is obviously the most important question. Do Balrogs have wings?
There it is.
We have to go with that one. The second one, I have and I don't know quite how to phrase this, but I have a question that I would love, really nerdy, that I want to understand his approach to our accents in pronouncing words in his languages, because one thing I always find it's a part of the Tolkien community understandably loves the languages, and then is very like, that's not how you pronounce it. Tolkien would have hated you pronouncing it like this. I would love, but in his own world, he was very clear. We people spoken different dialects and accents, and so they would pronounce people's. We read about it in Lord of the Rings. They would pronounce Aragorn's name in slightly different ways. So he kind of clearly, in world, he accepted this. So I would love to understand what his approach would be to us in our world.
Robert froze up again.
Oh, I do apologize, but it's my bad internet connection. I wish I could blame anything other than rubbish internet, but that's what it is. But I would love to understand his approach to, in our world, our different accents and dialects using his created languages. So I would come up with a clever and erudite question around that. The third one, I think I would just say, could you please show me your favorite tree? Because I just think that he loved trees. Do you mind the slight digression? I don't think I've told you this story, because this is one of my favorite stories I've heard about Tolkien recently. I was at a lecture last year sometime, a Tolkien lecture, with Dr. Femi something. I've forgotten her name. She's in the University of Glasgow.
Dimitra Femi.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. And she told this fantastic story. She'd been doing a whole load of research about Tolkien with like interviews that he gave, just random newspaper articles about him, the kinds of stuff that generally hasn't come up in Christopher Tolkien's work, but other stuff that's out there. And she told this story of when he was old, just before he was going to die, and he had this what we would probably today call a PA. And it was his secretary. They had this long-standing relationship. Once a week, they were friends as well as work colleagues. Once a week, she would come to his house with the post, as it was, and they would go through with the post. And they would start with the work, and then after the work, they'd like relax and chat for a while. And this last time, she told this story of the last time that she saw him. She did this as normal. She went to the house with the post, and he was there, a very old man, and he said, No. This time, don't worry. We'll do that another time. This time, let's go for a walk." And she said, "Are you sure? Okay." And he got up and they went for a walk. And he was a very old man. And she started getting a bit concerned. They were going for this really long walk. And she said, "Where are we going?" And then he just said, "Just this way." And they went to the Oxford, I think Arboretum is there. And he went around and he went up to all these trees and he just put his hand on these trees, and then went on to another tree and put his hand on the tree, and he went down to the willows by the riverside and he just like went there and touched them. And he was saying goodbye. He said, "I want to show you my favorite trees." And that was his way of saying goodbye to this person who'd been with him all this time, was to include her in him saying goodbye to his favorite trees. It's such a touching story. So I would just love him to point and say, "That's one of my trees."
Wow, man, that's really good. I kind of want to steal that one, man. That's really good. Gosh, this is a tough one, and one that like I would probably spend hours trying to come up with. Like, okay, I've only got 3 questions. Like, but if you're like just dropping me, if I walk, if I go visit Oxford and I walk through a time machine doorway and all of a sudden Tolkien's there and I have the opportunity to ask him 3 questions on the spot, I'm probably going to be like, I'll be like, remember when you wrote Lord of the Rings? That was awesome. So one of the ones that I would love to kind of ask and get, like, we know that in his later life, he was working on expanding the Silmarillion, like turning the Silmarillion into a Lord of the Rings ish, tale, like much more, narrative informed, I guess is what I'm trying to say, than the Silmarillion as it was published. That was kind of the next thing when he finally got to the point where it could happen. It was just, he was getting on in years, obviously. And so that never came to pass. I would be really curious to find out, outside of the Silmarillion, if there was any tales that he would really want to expand on. And if he ever had in mind, eventual stories, like to tell, we get all these notes and stuff from, the War of the Rohirrim example, where we have like this little contained story about Helm Hammerhand and the time that, how Helm's Deep came to be called Helm's Deep because of this battle and this winter and everything. I would be really interested to find out if there's anything like that he would have thought as a nugget of an idea for a place like Rune or Harad or something. Like Rune especially has always been really interesting to me, and I think there could be some really cool adaptational things done with Rune, to take inspiration from Eastern civilizations, that were kind of clued in that those civilizations are based on. So yeah, I basically, if there's anything that he never wrote down, but it's like this nugget of an idea in his brain and like nobody else knows about it, that's what I want to know about. So yeah, that's one. Another one, see, and I'm gonna put one out there that would like maximize my time. I'd be like, Professor, let's watch these films that have been adapted from your works. Wow. And I want to hear what your thoughts are on it. So we sit down and we watch Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. We watch Rings of Power. Maybe we go back to the Bakshi and the Rankin Bass. I don't know. Yeah. It would be really interesting to me because we got an idea of what Christopher thought of Peter Jackson's films. And there's part of me that wonders if Tolkien himself would have actually been more forgiving than Christopher was. Because there's, if you go back to some of his correspondence, Like there was one adaptation, I can't remember what year it was or anything, where he actually recommended cutting out like Helm's Deep in order to make this adaptation work. And we look at that and be like, oh my God, like why would you cut out Helm's Deep? It's like that sounds like base treachery or something. So I actually think, and I've had conversations with a fair number of people. Corey Olsen was one that when we were in London, I talked about this with him. I think J.R.R. Tolkien would actually be more forgiving of changes for adaptation than Christopher was, because I think J.R.R. is more the storyteller, and Christopher was more the scholar. So I think those are different relationships to the work, perhaps. But that's just, it's kind of conjecture, like it's very much reading between the lines. So it's hard to say exactly where he would land. And you might be right. He might hate all of them. It's very, very possible. But man, wouldn't it be fun though to sit there, as long as he didn't get too mad, like to sit there and like see his reaction to his works being adapted to things.
I did see ages ago, there was a fantastic article I read about the two things in his lifetime that were adaptations of a sort of his works that he just gave a thumbs up to, which was one of which was like some artwork, and the other one was someone who did a record of Tom Bombadil's songs, put music to Tom Bombadil, and it's a guy, and I can't remember. It's like a really old school British musician, like musical musician guy. Someone like Flanders or Swan or Topping. Any ancient British people out there might know who I'm talking about. It was one of those people, and it's just like, it was so random. The things he went, yeah, that's good. I like that. That I just wonder whether there would be like a something would catch him in a way that we would not expect. That he would like, that we would go, why do you like that? But there's something in his spirit that he had this incredibly kind of puckish sense of humor. He just really, I think there would be things that we have this idea of him as being this very straight-laced kind of like professor, but he had such a sense of humor. I think there'll be some random things that he would love that we would not expect.
Well, yeah, there's like the story of wasn't it he and C.S. Lewis dressed up like polar bears or something at one point? And like I think, was it, I can't remember now. It was one of my interviews. I think it was with Brian Sibley. He talked about him like falling down the stairs for a laugh, like purposely tumbling down the stairs to like fake getting hurt or something. I can't remember the exact story, but yeah, he did have a wonderful sense of humor, and it would be hilarious if he, in my scenario here, we sit down and watch the Peter Jackson movies, and he's like, oh, shield surfing Legolas. I love that. That is great. I love everything about that. Or nobody tosses a dwarf. That's hilarious. Yes, I love it. Things that we look at and think like, oh God, can you imagine Tolkien's reaction to that? Who knows? Like it's fun to think about, like, what his reaction might be. But I do think, a lot of people see like the one quote that Christopher had on him, and kind of associate that like his dad would have thought the same way, which I don't necessarily think that's fair. I don't think it's also, I'm very cautious about putting words into Tolkien's mouth, of putting words into somebody's mouth who is not here to say them themselves. So yeah, it'd be very interesting, to say the least.
The other thing, just on that, I always think it's worth pointing out, is that he sold the rights to this. And it's not like some people are just coming out there and just saying, I'm going to do this to spite him. He acted, and he did this for the best of reasons. He thought, you know what, I've got this thing here. I wish to provide for my family. And I'm going to try and sell the rights to this so that I can make sure that when I'm gone, my family are going to be okay. Yeah. And I think at a very basic level, at a very basic level, I think he probably accepted the fact that these aren't going to be exactly how he wanted them to be, because he sold the complete rights, which perhaps his successors, Christopher probably regretted later.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's basically, he gave up complete rights over things, which means that he understood, because he was obviously a clever guy. He understood that things would be produced that he didn't have creative control over, that he wouldn't necessarily agree with. He may or may not like them, but he accepted that as effectively the price of looking after his family. So, a hat tip to him. Who you can't say that you wouldn't do the same thing in his situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, he even said in there's one letter where he says something about like you either have the choice of money or creative control, and he went for the money, and like you said, it is providing for his family. Like who wouldn't do that? But so I mean, we can postulate as much as we want, but at the end of the day, we don't know exactly what his reaction would be to any of these things, and but yeah, I do think it's fun, to think about Tolkien's sense of humor in those stories that we do have of him. All right. Pokeball DK, I love your interviews with rings artists and actors, really creative people who obviously love what they do and are so eloquent talking about it with you. Thanks, and keep up your great work. Yeah, the interviews are a lot of fun. Definitely one of my favorite parts of this gig. And I know, Robert, you mentioned earlier, we've both talked to Bear McCreary. That's one of the more recent folks. But yeah, hopefully eventually we can get somebody from War of the Rohirrim on here. That'd be really cool. Yeah, I know Miranda Otto's coming back. That's something we didn't talk about. Miranda Otto's coming back for War of the Rohirrim. She's going to be the narrator. Did you hear that?
I did, and I'm torn in that I obviously love Miranda Otto, and I think that this is fantastic. I'm not a huge fan of the kind of the fantasy framing device because it's too often used as a way to try and to the people who might not know the connections between this and the other story to sort of say, it sort of over explain and why this is important to the story that I much prefer things when they're just treat them on their own merits, and if people are interested, they can then go off and see what the links are afterwards. So that doesn't mean this is going to be bad. They might do this really well. I'm not prejudging it, but I always have that small alarm bell in my brain when I hear that's, which is seemingly what this is she is the narrator of it.
Yes,
so it's like, and I can already imagine it's that they're settled around the fireside and she's telling all of the children the story of the legend of Helm Hammerhand, and it's just like, I get it, but do you need that framing? If the story's good, which it is, then just tell the story. So I don't know. We'll wait and see. So I love Miranda Otto. I'm sure she will do a fantastic job, but I personally, I'm not a huge fan of that device.
Okay, so I, on the other hand, have a heart here, Robert. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's well documented.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So yeah, I think that I definitely see, and I hadn't looked at it that way, that the over explaining does happen a lot when people use that device. And this is one area I think where my nostalgia for the original films might just trump whatever, whatever fears I might have about, how that might play out, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, so when are you guys going to announce that David Wenham is coming back as Faramir, and it's going to be, Faramir and Éowyn's telling this story to their kids, like it's just a scene I want to see, even if it's like 30 seconds. Like she opens a book and is like, I'm going to tell you the tale of Helm Hammerhand, and then I imagine, the most we would get from her as the narrator. I don't think they would use that as a device throughout the entire story. I think it's more like, essentially what we've gotten in prologue sequences, where it's like, okay, we're setting up this time frame in Middle Earth. Like what what is Rohan like at this point in history kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I'm a sucker for that. Like I'm excited.
I get that, and I completely understand it. For me, I just have a little thing appearing at the bottom of the screen that says "centuries before the War of the Ring," and then we can get into the story.
You get on it. I get it.
That would work for me. So
Yeah.
it's I don't know. Some things I'm happy to just leave. I didn't need 20 years later in Harry Potter. I don't think I need 20 years later in Lord of the Rings. I'm okay with it.
That's another channel, another franchise that you don't cover is Harry Potter, but you're into Harry Potter as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all grown up with it, haven't we? So
that's another series with fantastic audiobooks, by the way. I love those audiobooks.
Yeah, do you have Stephen Fry over there in America?
We have Jim Dale. Which I really like. I've actually not listened to the Stephen Fry versions, but I know that that's what you guys have over there across the pond. But I really like I like the Jim Dale versions.
Yeah. So I've not heard them at all, but for me, the voice of Harry Potter, the audiobooks is Stephen
Fry. So, yeah, it's great. Like apparently there's because I like across the board. Usually when I say, "Oh, the Harry Potter audiobooks are great," no matter which version people are talking about, they agree. And then, into the conversation, I'll either realize like, okay, yeah, we're talking about the same ones, or, oh, you're talking about the other ones. Those are great too, yeah. So I'll have to try the Stephen Fry ones. I'm sorry, Fingers Titan. He's outraged that I haven't heard the Stephen Fry versions. My bad. I have a project coming up and I'm supposed to make a meal for the Nazgul. What would you recommend? I don't know that the Nazgul eat anything.
No. Reflective rambling. By the way, one of my moderators. Is it your birthday today? It might be. If so, happy birthday. If not, I apologize. Yeah. So this is picking up a question for York there, which she regularly does on my live streams, picking up questions from people, which is incredibly generous. But no. So the Nazgul are not there. So they do not eat. They drink people's fear is basically the closest I would get. But no, they used to be human, but they literally faded. So they're not. You get the robes, but they're not there underneath the robes. So yeah, they are wraiths.
So yeah, if you're, I guess you could be really. Really cheeky, as you guys might say, and just bring an empty plate and say they don't need anything, or I don't know, scare the other person that you're presenting this to, and then be like, that is the meal, your fright and your fear.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, although the approval of Sauron, what is it that they live for? It's an odd one.
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody could come up with something, but we're gonna take it from the book nerd perspective.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing I would throw to the chat.
Yeah.
Give us the best answer. We're far too literal nerds here. Yes. We're just like, but technically these are just not real. So you will have a better answer. I'm sure someone in the chat will.
Yeah, I can't. My mind can't stretch that enough to say like what a Nazgul would eat, because I'd be like, why? They don't need to. TC, thanks for the super chat. The only thing in Arda I'd turn the Floyd playlist off for, the two best in the game by far. Well, thank you so much. Consider a collab of Tolkien refs in A Song of Ice and Fire, the homage, i.e. names like Drogo and etc. Thanks for everything from Boston. So is that references? Oh, Tolkien references in A Song of Ice and Fire. Sorry, sometimes I'm slow at catching these.
Fine. Yeah, this is my bad. I mean, I get asked this kind of thing a lot, obviously covering
I was gonna say, because I have no idea when it comes to A Song of Ice and Fire. So this is entirely a question for you here.
If you like that kind of thing, I would humbly, I'm trying to remember what the name of the video. I did was, and I'm shamelessly plugging it because actually I didn't write it. This is one of my collaborators, History of Westeros, did the first draft, and I just sort of added in my bits to it, which is an analysis of, if you're on a Song of Ice and Fire fan, you will know the chapter when Bran and co arrive at the Night Fort. And they're there near the wall, and they have to go to the other side of the wall. The links between that and the Fellowship about to go into Moria are ridiculous. That to the extent that you get somebody dropping something down a well, then up out of the well emerges somebody, and then they get stabbed with a spear. But everyone thinks they're dead, but no, they've got mail underneath it. There's so many of these things, one after another after another, and it was such an amazing video. And my friend Aziz, as I say, he did the first draft of it. And then he was lucky enough last year to get an interview with George R.R. Martin, and he thought, this is my moment. I get to ask him how when you do that kind of thing, when you're taking all of these images that are very clearly from Tolkien, how do you draw them all in like that? And George R. Martin just like a straight face said, oh no, I wasn't trying to do that there. That must just be subconscious. And it's just like, what? You can't.
Oh my gosh.
This is great video, and I was in awe of all of these links that he'd managed to draw out. But it turns out George R. R. Martin just denied it to his face. So, but there are so many. I mean, a few of my favorite. Tyrion, obviously, is existing both in Tolkien's world and in George R. R. Martin's. My favorite is. As we're on Tolkien channel, you will know Arthur Dine. If you sort of pronounce it phonetically as it's written, it looks like Arthur Dane. And then if you, Song of Ice and Fire fans will know Arthur Dane is a very important character there in the sort of the back history to all of this. So with his sword Dawn. So that I'm convinced is a deliberate George R. R. Martin nod.
Interesting. Yeah, that is. So I've not dove into the Song of Ice and Fire thing. It's not traditionally my kind of thing. So I haven't gone into that realm. I did watch some of the Wheel of Time show. I have some friends who are really big into the books of Wheel of Time. So I watched that to kind of like pick their brain, adaptationally speaking, because those are always interesting conversations to me to like, obviously I've had a lot of those conversations myself around Rings of Power, Peter Jackson and everything. But to hear from people where I'm not familiar with the books was really interesting to me, for me to watch this same show and then hear from people who really like the books. And I'm watching the show. And so I'm like texting friends and stuff and being like, okay, so like these four people are like, they're the hobbits basically, right? And they're like going out from their area. Oh, look, and they're being chased by a ring wraith. Is that what this guy's deal is? And so that was one. It's funny that you mentioned this happens in some places in George R. R. Martin, but I've heard in Wheel of Time as well. I don't know if you do a little bit of Wheel of Time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a Wheel of Time video. I mean, I've read the books, so I mean, and I watched the show. I would personally say the difference is that the Wheel of Time is one of, there were a number back in around then that was written in that were in the shadow of Tolkien, and so the structure is written, and you can a lot of the sort of David Gemmell and Eddings and people like that wrote very the Shannara books as well. Very similar. It's the same structure. You get starting off in some sheltered village, and then there's this existential threat to the world, and our small band of heroes have to go out and do a quest. The structure is the same. So that's what I would say very broadly. The Wheel of Time expands out much bigger than that, but it certainly starts with that. If you don't mind me, very briefly though, I did just think of the one thing I do have to say about the link between A Song of Ice and Fire and The Lord of the Rings is that George R. R. Martin, when asked about the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, we've obviously seen the TV show, but the end of the books will be different. He has said, and he's always quoted on it, that it will be bittersweet. But the bit that people don't pick up on is that he then explains what he means by bittersweet, and he uses two examples from the Lord of the Rings. These are the only examples of what we have for what he means by that. The first is with Frodo. He says Frodo saves Middle Earth, but
not for himself. Yeah,
exactly. And so he has to leave, and that he thinks is bittersweet. And the other thing he talks about, in the most glowing terms I've ever heard anyone speak about it, the scouring of the Shire. A lot of people are not huge fans of the scouring of the Shire. George R. R. Martin thinks it's the best chapter in the world. Every time he comes back to it, he thinks that it's better. And he thinks, so that is the kind of feel, he says, that's the feel I want for the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Now, I could talk for a long time about what I think that means, but as I say, that would be veering into what the end of A Song of Ice and Fire is like. But the crucial thing is that in A Song of Ice and Fire is very different to the Lord of the Rings, but the end feel he wants to be very similar.
Okay. So what should we set the over under at of how many more Tolkien books come out before the next George R. R. Martin book? That's the question.
Depends what you count as a George R. R. Martin book, because he's if you're talking about the next one, the Song of Ice and Fire,
that one.
I don't know. I'm an eternal optimist in this, and I've given up guessing when it's going to come. But he is 3/4 of the way through, and if you wish to do the maths, he's been writing it for 11 years, and he's now 3/4 of the way through. So that's the situation we're at. We could probably get a couple more Tolkien books out.
For sure, right?
Than I'd have thought.
Yeah, it just like the memes that people put out when Tolkien releases a new book and point out the fact that they're still waiting for the next Song of Ice and Fire. Like, it's one of those. I mean it in a all in good fun kind of way, but it just gets a little bit funnier to me each time that it happens. When like Nature of Middle Earth came out, and I was like, haha, like this guy's like, come on. You're losing to Tolkien here, and he's been dead for decades, and then we get Fall of Numenor, and I'm like, where's it at?
Yeah, George? But the thing you forget is that when this gets published, it's going to be this big as a book.
Right. Yeah,
it's going to be in like 15 volumes. It's going to be ridiculous.
It's going to be the length of all the Tolkien books we've gotten in the interim in the last 11 years.
Pretty much, yeah.
Thomas, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you both for the hours of entertainment and learning. If you could only watch 2 different films for the rest of your life, what would they be? Okay. This is a really interesting one. So when you say 2 different films, do you mean like two?
Can we count the trilogy as one film?
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to take that cop out and say the trilogy is one film, and people will hate me for it, but I'll say it. So Lord of the Rings trilogy is one for me.
Yeah, I think I would go with that, and I would probably add on something like Blade Runner Director's Cut. Something that I can go back, or actually, if not that, then something that is silly fun, like Shaun of the Dead or something like that, that I just know I would, every time it comes on, I just enjoy it.
Oh, man, that's a good... So taking the cop out, because I was going to say, like, it'd be really hard for me. I'd have to pick 2 movies from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, most likely. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I almost feel like it would have to be something silly or fun, like maybe one of the Star Wars movies or something. I might do that. Like it's tricky, because if I get something too deep cut, or not necessarily deep cut, but something that I only watch every once in a while, but I really like it when I watch it. So like Kurosawa's Yojimbo is like one of my favorite movies. I absolutely love that movie, but I don't think I would watch it that often, like every single, not every day, but like for the rest of my life. That would be really tough. Yeah, gosh. See, now the thing is, like I'm in, parent of 4 kids mode, and now I'm like, my brain is cycling through all the cartoons that I have to watch every single day. And I'm like, not those.
Treat yourself to something more grown up, perhaps.
Right? Yeah. Gosh, I'm gonna have to do some more thinking on that. This is a big question. Um, yeah, I don't know. I would lean toward maybe like one of the original trilogy Star Wars movies. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be a safe bet. Seth, thanks so much for the super chat. Did Tolkien invent orcs, or was he the first person to use? Robert, do you know the answer to this?
I think that they were, and I would have to research this. He invented the modern version of an orc, but I suspect this is where somewhere like Tolkien Gateway would probably help you. So feel free to look this up while I'm waffling on, and then you can correct me afterwards. But in terms of sort of the modern conceptualization that we have of what an orc is, this kind of green angry creature, forces of evil, intelligent but always the foot soldiers of the bad guy. That is Tolkien. Tolkien did come up with that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the derivation of the word itself, orcish, that I think comes from probably Old English or something along those lines. And as a sort of an attribute rather than a particular species.
Yeah. So according to, this is very, very quick surface level research here, but I'm seeing that names similar to orc can be found in the Old English poem Beowulf, which checks out. Yeah. So yeah, Northern European folk tales, fairy tales, that kind of thing. But yeah, you're totally dead on. Like orcs as we think of them, obviously in Lord of the Rings, but then other things, Dungeons and Dragons and gosh, all kinds of fantasy stuff have used orcs since, and those all kind of come from those all stem from Tolkien's use of that. Jim, thanks for the great content over the years. Thank you so much, Jim. And we'll probably wrap up here, guys, in about 5 minutes or so. Try to get through some of these other super chats before we sign off here. Callie, for me and reflective ramblings, Balrogs do have wings, but it's only temporary from a spell or potion. Thoughts? Also trolling Robert a bit.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate you spreading this out into everywhere that I go.
She's trolling both of us. So what she doesn't realize is that this is also a big sticking point for me too, that I like to throw out there, like, for the record, Balrogs don't have wings. They don't.
Well, my policy position is that I now have to have one on Balrogs. Is that if Balrogs do have wings, they always forget to use them. That's right. That's the thing. Is that they fall lots. For a creature with wings, they always fall.
Yes.
But Callie, there's and I've no idea where it started. Probably with Callie herself over on my live stream. This idea that maybe they don't have wings, but then just before they go into battle, they just take a cheeky swig of Red Bull, which gives them their wings.
Oh my gosh!
No, let's just stop that now.
Yeah, I am of the same mind here. So I will fully admit, like I said earlier, my Balduck here looks awesome with wings. Like, that looks cool.
Yeah,
I can respect that, And there's so many artist depictions from over the years that look really cool with wings. And some of my favorite Balrog, side note here, if I can divulge from the path here a little bit, or divert from our conversation path just a little bit. Some of my favorite ones are where Balrogs are more humanoid in shape than monster. More mannish in shape, I should say. Like, Peter Jackson gave us very much a demoned, big, huge demon, whereas I've seen some illustrations where they're more very tall human and they have the wings of shadow. Like, that's the sweet spot for me. But yeah, I like you said, they tend to fall from high places a lot for creatures with wings. And I know, like, penguins have wings, I get it, but Balrogs also aren't swimming, and penguins use theirs for swimming, right? Like for steering and stuff when they swim. So
Well, the man shaped thing is straight from Tolkien, as I'm sure you know,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
happen to have right in front of me, just to quote the great man himself. This is the actual quote from When Then in Moria.
There we go.
It says, "It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form of man shape." And then the most unhelpful word that Tolkien could have put there is "of man shape, maybe."
I mean, yeah. I mean, oh my gosh. Higgy says that they use their wings as a mating display like peacocks. That's what the purpose they serve.
Maybe.
They,
Just put maybe after everything you're not
yeah,
sure
yeah,
about.
that's what yeah.
Just do what
Oh,
Tolkien did.
oh my word. Yeah. I like the shadow, like it's called their wings of shadow. So it's shadow but it's metaphorical wings, guys. It's not real. They're not real wings. But like even as I'm searching here, I'm looking up. I was trying to find here we go. Here we go. This is the one. This is one of my absolute favorite illustrations. I'm going to present it to you guys. You guys have seen this in my video before, I'm sure. Let's see here. There we go. This is one of my favorite Balrog illustrations. So we've got the humanoid shape here, maybe. That's covered. And we've got Shadow coming out. No wings, just Shadow. But he's really big and humanoid in form. We got the flame, we got the whip, we got the sword. I just love this image. This is my favorite Balrog right here.
Well, if you fancy going down a complete wormhole with this, one thing I would suggest is really worth investigating is the scene with Gandalf and Bilbo. You'll remember it from the film when he's there, I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to help you. And he seems to kind of grow and the shadow appears behind him. That's described exactly like that in the book, that he seems to grow and the shadow appears up and around him. And Gandalf is a Maya.
Yeah.
And the Balrog is a Maya. And the description of those two events is very, very similar. The Balrog seems to be doing what Gandalf was doing, which is just like trying to make himself look big and impressive with a big shadow coming out behind him. And that seems to be what it is. But the way that the Balrog did it was to make it look like wings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, because they are very, like you said, that it's described very similarly, and like you said, they are the same order of being, so it would make sense that this is a trait of the Maiar. So sorry, winged Balrog fans out there, I fully admit it looks cool. I'm not denying that it looks cool, but if you're asking me what's in the text, they don't have wings, but they're cool. They're cool. All right. Well, on that note, I can't think of a better thing to lead off with or to end with than a debate about Balrog wings, which I guess isn't really a debate because we are so much on the same side of this.
Absolutely.
But let's leave off with what would you say, Robert, is the Tolkien adaptation, or it could be, game, whatever. So obviously the big news from last year was Embracer had bought Tolkien Enterprises, or Middle Earth Enterprises, I'm sorry. And so they have film TV rights for Lord of the Rings, Hobbit up for grabs. Maybe, I don't know. It's a whole, the legal stuff aside, we'll put that to the side for a moment. What is kind of your dream Middle Earth project? If you could pick anything, and maybe it's you hope that the Silmarillion rights go somewhere and that we get films on the Silmarillion. What would be just your dream Middle Earth project at this point?
I'm going to give a very quick shout out to MERP, Middle Earth Role Playing, the tabletop role playing game, which if anyone, I've not played that for decades, I'm sure, but it was the quality of the materials that they had there were so good. If somebody could replicate that in some way, that'd be amazing. In terms of like on screen, my dream would be to have the first, basically the first bit, the pre-first stage, maybe even going up into the first stage of the Silmarillion as a really, really high quality anime that just covers the bits that are in the Silmarillion. So there's no, and it's almost like a sort of a documentary version of just putting it across there so people can see what it is. It would be hugely hard to do. But if somebody could do that, that would be absolutely amazing to actually see and experience the music of the Ainur, to show, you know, the battles with Morgoth, to get into the great epic stories, you know, into Feanor and things like that. That, because I would, in the same way that, you know, you kind of hesitate with some of these things, like young Aragorn has many merits as an idea, but at the same time, your part of you's going, but we only know 3 or 4 things he did. There's so much, they could go very wrong. It's the same with something like Feanor. They could go very wrong by trying to plug the gaps, trying to turn it into a massive series. If they literally just show us what Tolkien did tell us, and just say, okay, we've got half an hour's worth of content here, that would work perfectly for me. That's the kind of thing. It has to be high quality. It has to be sticking to the text, as close. Obviously, there will have to be some creative decisions made. That always has to happen, but as close as possible to what was there, without trying to fill in any extra gaps. That would be my dream.
Wow, that's a good one, man. Okay, so I have a few that have been in my mind. Traditionally I've kept it to things that have rights already out in play. Because Silmarillion is such an unknown, like, I just from like seeing, you know, the fact that Rings of Power exists kind of implies that the estate is willing to play ball, and like maybe at some point down the line we get Silmarillion stories. So that would bring into play things like, oh, I'd love to see a Children of Hurin film or something. But most of my thoughts have centered around things that the rights are already out there, so that it's much more easy to see them pop up. The silly answer right off the bat is I want Lego to do a complete Middle Earth saga video game. Like, that's my silly answer. It's silly in that it's, you know, it's not what most you know, serious Tolkien fans would think of, but man, it would be really fun, and I would love playing it with my kids. And then I have 3 answers total. The second one that I think could be really cool, and again, it kind of, to your point, like there's key moments that would be really cool, but they'd have to create stuff, so it could go sideways. But that would be the Angmar War, where we have the Witch King as the bad guy, and we tell the story of the fall of Arnor, essentially. And we get, you know, finally Glorfindel gets some action. He gets to play in, you know, an adaptation. Maybe we finally get Glorfindel. The other thing that I would really that I think has some potential that would be really fun and cool, and I've said this for a long time because I made a whole video on it. I'm gonna grab my guy here because he helps illustrate my point. A Lord of the Rings animated series in the style of the Weta mini epics, because I love these little figures. Have you seen these before?
Yes.
They're kind of cartoony in a way. Like it makes me think of Clone Wars ish kind of style. But I would love to see a Lord of the Rings animated series in the style of Weta mini epics. Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Like, they could go and do The Hobbit and, you know, take another stab at that. but I don't know. I think it would be really fun if they did a Lord of the Rings animated series. And if it was a series, they could totally go the route of um, having a whole episode of Tom Bombadil. That whole Tom Bombadil story could be in a single self-contained episode, and it might not like be this seamless thing that was in the whole narrative, but by golly, we would get a Tom Bombadil episode, and it might feel like just this random thing that you could totally skip on rewatch if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But by golly, we'd get a Tom Bombadil. Yeah, that's been something on my mind ever since I saw the Weta mini epic, especially the illustration of one by Jerry Vanderstelt. He did an illustrated version of the Gandalf one, and I looked at that and I was like, there's some potential there. I could see that. I did see so before we sign off, I wanted to follow up on a comment here that Callie had. Where is Callie's comment? Because
she's
made
still
a point.
trolling me about Balrog
of course
rings.
yes yes, but she made a point and now I can't find it.
Well, while you look for that, I will just say,
Yeah.
Angel, I spotted actually just one thing which would be amazing, said in the chat, an open world RPG based in Middle
yes.
Earth. If they could do that, that would be mammoth. But something that feels like Witcher 3 in terms of you feel like you can go wherever you want to, talk to whoever you want to, explore whatever you want to. Set, I don't know, just before the story of the Lord of the Rings, so that you can actually go in and explore these, but go to Edorast and Minas Tirith and things. That would be absolutely amazing. So yeah, if that could ever be real, I would love it. But
100%.
Huge amounts of work. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's also on my list. I kind of forgot about that one, but yes. I've had so much fun playing game, whether it's something a little more cartoony in style, like Breath of the Wild, is one that's just like loads of fun. I think the upcoming Hogwarts Legacy one will be really cool, from everything I've seen of that. So I think there's definitely, like, it makes too much sense for that to not come at some point, I think. Surely.
Yeah, you say that. I mean, I'm the same with like Game of Thrones. Why hasn't there been a single decent Game of Thrones video game? I've no idea that they would make millions from that. It's I think the and I don't know the industry, but it from the outside it looks like the amount of time and energy you have to put into creating a game like that is so huge that you have to have 100% belief that in 10 years' time this is going to be a massive success. So I mean, some of these, I'm a big fan of Skyrim. That's been like, I don't know, 10 years probably since Skyrim came out, something like that, and they're still at least 2 or 3 years away from the sequel. And this takes a long time to do these things.
No doubt. I do think that, like, of all the franchises though, Lord of the Rings has to be one of the, it is one of the few franchises that I feel like it feels like a no-brainer. Like, even though there's a lot of risk and a lot of cost and a lot of time investment doing, if one of those did well, I can't help but feel like people would just flock to the opportunity to be in an open world Middle Earth. Because right now, my favorite, well, aside from LotR, obviously, LotR is like in a category of its own as far as adaptations, games, whatever. LotR is LotR. That's why I always say LotR is LotR. We set that aside because it is one of a kind. But my favorite open world Lord of the Rings experience is in the aforementioned Lego Lord of the Rings game, because you can explore a little bit. It takes you like 10 seconds to go from Edoras to Minas Tirith, but they're there, and you can wander around. You can walk into Mordor and all that fun stuff. All right, so we'll leave off with this last comment from Callie. She says, well, at least Clueless Fangirl is on our side in regards to Balrog wings. And I just had to say, Callie, that is not the feather in your cap that you think it might be. I mean, come on. Helen doesn't even like dwarves. She rags on dwarves all the time, and I give her such a hard time for it. So, I mean, you take what you can get, I guess, but We'll have to have Helen on one of these streams sometime because that would be a lot of fun.
I'm sure she would love to.
All right, guys. Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us so late in your day. You can now go to bed and get some rest. It's been absolutely great conversation, and we have all kinds of fun conversations like this, you and I, behind the scenes, but we'll have to do more of these in front of the camera for folks to join in and have fun.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute honor. Congratulations again for the 900K.
Oh, thank you.
Massive achievement. And you've been getting so much love in the chat for it as well. Richly deserved. But thank you for having me on. Yeah, we will do it the other way around as well. And I'll have you on my channel at some point soon as well. Because I think you came on for a Christmas charity stream I did probably the previous year. But we'll get you on for a proper one at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And folks, if you're not already, I would imagine most of you who are here already are, but if you're not already, you should definitely go subscribe to In Deep Geek. That is Robert's channel. I'm sure one of the mods can pop a link in the chat there for us. He's got great stuff. And like I said, he doesn't just cover Tolkien. Obviously, that's the easiest in, because if you're here, you're interested in Tolkien. So go watch his Tolkien stuff. But then if you have interest in some of the other cornerstone fantasy franchises like A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher, which, side note, that's another one that I really enjoy. Like you said earlier, that's one of those that I don't need to talk about it publicly because I don't have the knowledge base of it, but just watching it on its surface, I've really enjoyed that one too. So I definitely go to your Witcher stuff personally to be slightly more educated than I am. Nowhere near as educated as you are, but yeah. And Moonman says Robert's narration is awesome as well. Yeah, Robert has that wonderful accent that I, as an American, do not have. So he will always have that over me. If you think I just need some more accent to my, that wonderful British accent, then Robert's your guy. For sure.
You have your own wonderful accent, so let's do not do yourself down. This is excellent.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. Robert, we'll definitely see you around some other time. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.